Happy Friday and welcome to a brand new episode of Brain Scratch. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And this is a very special episode. We're doing, in part, a case update. But this case has this element that really is one of the most brazen criminal acts that we've covered recently here on the channel. This was originally a Searchlight case that we covered about 3 years ago. That's the story of Elnaz Hajtamiri. She was abducted in Ontario, Canada. Let me go ahead and bring up a picture of her here. And I'll have a link to the original episode down below if you'd like to watch it. But there are significant developments on this case that I wanted to share with you guys. And on top of that, I thought we need to have a conversation about how to prevent people from becoming a target themselves. So I've pulled on a few of my friends, a couple of experts. One of them is releasing a book literally this week that touches on some aspects of that. The other has released a book as well. I've asked them to make their top 5 tips. We're going to get to all that information, but let's start with the case of Elnaz Hajtamiri. So Elnaz essentially had a relationship with a boyfriend. His name was Mohammed Lilo, and she wanted to end it. And apparently Mohammed didn't. There was some rough things that happened in terms of their relationship, and then things took a turn for even the worse. It seems like Mohammed started putting together almost what you would consider like a ragtag group of thugs to follow, harass, and attack Elnaz. In November of 2021, while Hajtamiri's Lexus was in for service, staff at the service center found 2 illegal tracking devices attached to her vehicle. So that was the start of her realizing she's got a problem. Something really bad's going on here. The following month, December 20th, in the underground parking garage of her Richmond Hill condo, 2 masked men attacked her. And we're talking a vicious attack. One of them had a frying pan and struck her in the head. The injuries so severe, she required about 40 stitches. I mean, a terrible, terrible attack. It's thought by some that they were actually looking to attack her, subdue her, and remove her from there. But one of the neighbors had come into the parking garage and started witnessing what happened. So the 2 attackers left without kind of completing their mission. They did leave in a stolen vehicle, and that would eventually be traced down, and those 2 men would be arrested. But also that month, they found a 3rd tracker on her car. So despite the fact that she keeps getting her car cleaned, they're finding these trackers, they're removing them. Seems like her boyfriend was paying someone, possibly a private investigator. We're now seeing some information that private investigators are definitely part of this story. And please know, one of the guests we're having on is a private investigator, but there are good private investigators, and there are private investigators that'll work essentially in the gray area. And that's kind of what we're talking about with the guys that are helping Mohammed Lilo here. So December, we get this brutal attack. She decides to go into hiding. Essentially, her family says, you've got to do something. If I recall correctly, it's either a family member's house or a close family friend's house that she goes into hiding at. And on January 10th, she winds up visiting the police station. She has to retrieve some personal belongings, including her vehicle, her cell phone, and her computer. And what I'm wondering is if her vehicle was actually at the police station in January, did they tag it again with another tracking device? Because literally 2 days later, around 8:30 p.m., 3 men dressed in police gear show up at the location where she is hiding. They claim that they have a warrant. They get the homeowner, to open their front door, and they come in and they subdue the homeowner. They drag Elnaz outside barefoot. And if I recall correctly, I think it's snowing. It's very cold at this time. And they put her into a white Lexus RX SUV, and they drive off. And she vanished. That was it. We still don't know where she is. No ransom demands, no communication. She just has not been seen ever since. Now, there is an update on this case. We can see Mohammed Lilo being arrested here. I think he's been incarcerated for about 3 years at this point. His lawyers keep asking for bail. Doesn't seem like he's getting it. And we have news just as of June 2025. A jury has found Mohammed Lilo guilty of aggravated assault in the December 2021 frying pan attack on his former girlfriend, Elnaz Hajtamiri. Hajtamiri is presumed dead after police say she was kidnapped from a Wasaga Beach, Ontario home where she had gone into hiding with loved ones. The jury convicted Lilo of orchestrating the vicious attack on his former girlfriend. So essentially, he's been convicted for the frying pan attack in the parking garage, but they haven't charged him for murder. They are actually going to run a murder charge against him, but that trial isn't going to start until May of 2026. The court heard Lilo was obsessed with Hajtamiri and wouldn't leave her alone, eventually having her followed by several men paid to kidnap her. And we do have a couple of the men here. All this story just spirals from here. These two guys basically pled guilty to their charges for what they had done. And here we have the note. Lilo tracked Hajtamiri using GPS and private investigators and hired people to assault her. There's at least 2 or 3 other individuals. One of them is in the US. He's arrested on separate murder charges at this point. There's still just this spider web in terms of people that are facing legal trouble, and all different parts of the processes happening around that. Some of the charges have been paused, other ones are moving forward. But the boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend, will face a murder trial in May of 2026. So I wanted to give you guys the update on that case. I wish we had a better outcome. Obviously, we don't. I really wish that, Elnaz would have been able to come home at some point. And obviously, that is not going to be the case here. And we'll see what happens with this. No-body homicides can sometimes be tricky to prosecute. We'll see how this goes up in Canada around this. But how can we avoid these types of situations? What can you do? And apparently, Mohammed Lilo, the guy must have had some money. Like he's literally kind of paying these thugs. He's paying private investigators. He's buying equipment. They're putting it on her car. How can you stop or prevent yourself from being a target? That's really part of the focus on the conversation today with our 2 special guests. Let's start by introducing the man on the right. He is Michael Kenney. He has been a private investigator for the past 25 years, and he specializes in stalking cases all over the country, but he often finds himself working in Nashville, Tennessee for several notable country music stars. Just don't ask him who they are, because even outside of being interviewed, he will never tell me. But Michael's been featured on numerous television networks. His cases have appeared on shows like Dateline, 2020, 48 Hours, and more. He's also the author of the books Think Like a Stalker and Stop Them, and How to Catch a Cheat. He was also one of the lead investigators for the first season of the #1 hit podcast Culpable. And Michael has a new project about to drop on HBO. You can tell us about that now, right, Michael?
Yeah, it comes out August 3rd or 4th.
Okay, and what's the name of that one?
That's regarding the yogurt shop murders
Okay, yeah. I
in
think it
Austin,
might be,
Texas.
yeah, it might be called Yogurt Shop if I recall correctly. But yeah, it's coming out first week in August on HBO, and I'm sure they're going to be promoting it like crazy. It'll be the first thing you see for a period of time when you start HBO, I'm pretty sure. And of course, right next to him, we have Mike King. Mike King is a globally recognized cult and serial crimes investigator, and he's the creator of the true crime platform Profiling Evil, which of course includes the excellent YouTube channel. With over 4 decades of experience in law enforcement, Mike has served as chief of staff for the Utah Attorney General's office. He's trained with FBI profilers and led investigations into some of the most complex criminal cases in, it says modern history here, Mike, but let's be fair.
Yeah,
also ancient history. Didn't you solve
That
like
is true.
who killed King Tut, right? Was one of the
That's right. I'd like to see if Michael Kenney has a case that's older than 3,000 years. A cold case.
I don't think Nashville was clicking back then. So yeah. Mike King's also an expert commentator on Court TV and major media networks. He's an advocate for victims' rights and public safety, and the best-selling author of several books, including one of my favorite true crime books of all time, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. It's an amazing story, and if you haven't heard it or checked it out, you really need to. But this week, his latest book is available, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, and it pulls back the curtain on the dark world of criminal predators and, of course, how you can avoid becoming their prey. So, Mike, I'm curious about who's the intended audience for this book, because some of it seems to lean into investigation quite a bit. And what was the motivation for you writing it?
Yeah, thanks, John, and it's great to be on with Michael. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about today. Wolves in Sheep's Clothing was written for the true crime enthusiast, which is kind of odd because it's like how much information should you be providing? And I thought it would be a perfect time to not only talk a little bit and teach a little bit about the concept of predatory victim selection, but what we can do as individuals to reduce our risk of being victimized. And that's why I'm so excited to hear what Michael has to say today, because it really boils down to, while we never want to place blame on victims for being victimized, they still play a very important role in how much risk they're willing to take and the kind of exposure they're willing to step into in normal course, the normal daily activities that we do. And so I wanted to give them a way to kind of think like a predator, to be able to process what a predator does, but most importantly, how to minimize their own risk of being victimized.
Yeah, yeah. And when I saw that that was the focus on the book, I knew. I was like, well, that's why I got to bring Michael Kenney in, because Michael, tell us about your book. What's the focus of that, and how did you come to what motivated it?
Yeah, so we had done a lot of stalker cases, and I realized there was not really a central place for them to go that was easy to acquire the information. And I think like a big part of stalking is people go against their gut feeling of their women's intuition. And so I wanted to write something that's kind of like having a conversation with me about how I would do it for celebrity. We have a lot of actors that, somebody sees them on the big screen and they decide they're in love, and they're going to drive to LA and marry them. So it's a lot of common sense, but I also want them to think in the terms of how a stalker thinks to prevent the abuse and the harassment.
Absolutely. And I think you're touching on a really important fact there. And I think it's easy to understand in the lens of talking about celebrity, that there's this element of fantasy that comes into play. Oh, I know that that person would love me if I showed up at their door and I had a bunch of flowers and chocolates for them. Or, oh, I know if I got to meet them, they would want us to be together. But in truth, that element of fantasy doesn't just apply at that level. It applies at all kinds of other levels. It could be the guy sitting in the cubicle next to you, I think, as Mike phrases it in part of the book as well. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about fantasy, how it plays into this, and how can we use that or understand it to help avoid these situations?
Well, I think most predators are people that are in pursuit of legitimate kinds of needs, but the difference is they go about it illegitimately. And so I kind of like to use the idea of the fact of all of us have legitimate kinds of pursuits that we have. It might be that we want to create a relationship with someone, potentially date them, hope maybe even marry them. And a legitimate human being is going to go into that, and they're going to put their best foot forward. They're going to make sure their shoes are shined and that they're opening the door. But when things go wrong, legitimate folks go home and they think, what did I do wrong there? What can I do to fix this and change my behavior? What is it that is not working? And is it something that I'm willing to change? Where a predator is completely opposed to any of that thinking, because it's all intrinsic, it's all about them. And it's like, what can I do to control this individual, to maintain control of them, and to get them to comply with whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish? And there's a period of grooming, whether it's in criminal cases of sexual assault of children and adults, or the grooming that goes on, or fraud cases where people are saying, "Hey, we've known each other for a long time. You can trust me. This is a deal that you're going to make more money on than any other way." And during this grooming process, we really see the differences between legitimate kinds of behaviors and illegitimate. And I think the same thing happens in our personal relationships, John, that we see these people that will go in and say, I can't fix this part of me, so I'm going to go find another relationship and move on, versus a predator who says, no, I'm going to compel this person to fit inside the bubble that I want to live in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's strange that for me, fantasy just plays in at so many different levels when it comes to that. My wife and I are on this kick right now of watching these shows where people are just coming out of prison. And there's one in particular where they have roommates. Like, there's some nice couple that wants to help this person try to reacclimate to society, and they move them into their home. I mean, it is the night. It's reality TV. It's trashy, and it's the nightmare that it sounds like. But it's interesting to hear the dialogue, because it's like the criminal mindset has this thing about fantasy, even to the point of when they're coming out of jail, they're like, oh, now I'm going to be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want. And it's like, well, that's actually not true, because that's what you did to land in jail. So there's this weird like blind spot almost when it comes to fantasy. And I think that also applies with situations where you might be looking at intimate partner homicide and things like that. I think there's this kind of, well, if my wife wasn't around, then I would be able to take all the money and keep the house and keep the kids, and I could go on vacation. And I think people don't realize that if you go through with something like that, you're not the same person on the other side of that event. And that's part of the fantasy. It'll be just like my life now, except my wife won't be there and I'm going to have all her money. Like that's just not the reality of what happens in these situations.
And to dogpile on that, John,
Yeah.
is not only are they thinking all of that, but they're thinking, and in the course of all of this, everyone is going to view me as a victim for losing my wife, for this homicide occurring. And again, it just centers back on the individual rather than the ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael, can you tell us, I know you can't share who the cases happen with that you cover, but can you tell us of a situation where fantasy became an important role of a case that you were working?
Yes. So first of all, thank you, John, for bringing this out and letting us talk. And Mike, you and I are on the same page. I wish I could have had more time with you before this interview. Behavior, it all really boils down to behavior in so many ways. But I just wrapped up a stalker case where in the end, the person said the reason I stalked them and honestly did identity theft, like pretended to be them to the point of offering to sing the national anthem at an event, even though they could have jumped on the website and seen that this act was in Vegas that night. But it was that fantasy that I want what they have and they were nice to me. And then just essentially becoming them and getting tickets to sporting events and music events and causing people all kinds of trouble and money loss. And it's just a ridiculous thing. But the fantasy of wanting to be him is what propelled that. And the guy was a genius at social engineering. He could call you and get Mike's number, and Mike would give him. Well, Mike and I were talking before this about cowboy music. We don't call it that here in Nashville, but virtually any cowboy singer's information. This guy was so good at social engineering to the fact that he even got to live the fantasy of the entertainment industry. He was texting artists that had been uh, welcomed to the Grand Ole Opry here in Nashville, and just felt like he was part of the commitment of entertainment of the community, not commitment. And
Yeah.
he was very clever at knowing all their acronyms. I mean, I would read through these texts like I would have believed it. So yeah, the
That's amazing.
fantasy, he was all in, all in. And again, behavior.
And he was literally getting doors open, right? Like he was being led into these
Oh,
venues
when we finally
backstage.
had him arrested, and only in Nashville, and I'll say this between us, but only in entertainment will somebody say, if you can get him arrested to coincide with our release date on our new album, that would be great. And it didn't work out that way. But even when he was arrested, he was in like the equivalent of like an admiral's club of an event. He had social engineered his way to the top, and he was sitting there eating. And when they got
Wow.
him,
Wow.
but I
Jeez.
always say crazy is forever is a comment you'll hear me say a lot. And there was a lot of crazy in that situation.
Yeah.
And Michael, we see this in this psychopathic behavior where there is such a level of confidence that others don't feel like I can challenge them on that, or that they won't take that extra step to say, wait a minute, I need a little more corroboration or a little more validation. And we see it in political figures, we see it in criminals, this psychopathic personality type that is so arrogant and confident that others step back and say, well, gosh, they must be who they say they are.
I totally agree. And confidence goes a long way.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that it almost comes from a place of them feeling like they deserve it in some way. Like, oh no, of course, because this I deserve this because of how much I love that celebrity, or how big this act would mean to me emotionally. That means that I deserve for all this to happen. Yeah.
You know, it's
Uh,
funny you'd say that. One of my mentors from the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, Greg Cooper, often would say the mentality of the predator is, by golly, people like me and I deserve it. And you just saying that reminded me of that moment in time when he was teaching that concept to me, because we were talking about someone who was stepping over bounds that I think people with integrity would never step over. They would never violate. They would never push that hard. But these individuals do it without any question about whether they deserve it. By golly, I'm a good guy and I deserve this.
Well,
right.
your moral compass would go off, and there's no moral compass.
Yes.
Yeah.
But back to this gentleman, one of the things he did is he said he worked for one of the largest entertainment companies, so he got a lot of respect, and his LinkedIn even said it. But if I walked you guys into this particular label, they're primarily all young and beautiful, and he was not. So I couldn't believe people
Wow.
believed that that was his career, when in reality he worked in a box store essentially. So when we found that out,
Wow.
but he was very good, and it was all confidence. He would get in there and convince you. So
Yeah. Mike King, are there any early warning signs about people that are becoming obsessed with fantasies that could lead to violence or be more troublesome than, oh, if I meet this person, they're going to get me onto a stage in Nashville?
I think especially in interpersonal relationships, there are all kinds of red flags. And usually victims that I spoke to over the course of my career saw those come up. Oftentimes they even knew those were coming up. But here's the thing that we learned after studying fantasy for a long, long time, going through this profiling process, was that uh, fantasy always leads to a push for reality, but reality is never as cool as fantasy. And so the idea becomes, we dream up in our minds what is going to happen. Maybe it's going to be a special date that we've figured out, a date night, and we plan on how this thing's going to come together. And once we get going on that date night, things don't happen the way we fantasized. And so legitimate kinds of people, like hopefully the three of us, we sit back and we say, "Oh, dang, I really was hoping we were going to have, pork chops, but instead we're going to be eating burgers tonight." Where a predator will still go ahead and complete whatever that criminal act is. And I'm going to change kind of the picture now from a legitimate picture to an illegitimate picture. That predator who thinks that they're fantasizing about this movie star, like Michael's talking about, that if I show up on their porch with flowers, they're going to embrace me. That when they get there and the reality hits and that person says, "Thank you, and please go away, I've got a busy day today now," they walk away and they think, "I got to get back in that house and I got to figure out how I'm going to get in, but I'm going to get in this time in a way that that person can't push me away." And then if that doesn't work, in order to fulfill this fantasy I have of being with them, then I'm going to become more controlling, or more I'm going to take over and actually abduct or do something violent. And what happens is that as predators pursue fantasy, it always will fall short in reality. And so they got to go home and they got to figure it out. They got to fantasize about it some more and say, "Oh, but when this happens, I'm going to do this to correct it, and that's going to make it better." But when they act it out, it falls short. And this is what leads to serial predation, or a serial killer, or a serial sexual predator. Is there's If we could identify early on what the fantasy is and what's driving that, we could better prevent those actions from happening again, because this predator is going to act out that same fantasy. They're just going to fix the part in the story that broke down and became reality. And so that's why they're going to continue to over and over again commit these crimes, or to commit violence in relationships, or control in relationships. They're going to continue to pursue whatever that fantasy is, and they're going to find a way to fix it along the way. And it's never, in my opinion, ever fixed through legitimate means. It's always through illegitimate criminal means.
Well, and it sounds like you're also touching on a trend of escalation that happens with the creation of the fantasy, trying to act it out, and then never being fulfilled by those actions, to the point of, when does a stalker actually commit a homicide or actually take things to a level like that as well? Mike King, why is society so easily fooled by predators who appear normal? How are these people working these things, getting around these cracks, and finding their ways in to these people, to our lives?
Well, I think predators, number one, are the ultimate salesperson. They are marketing constantly, but the way they market is a little different than the way maybe each of us do with our podcasts or something. They are constantly sending out trial balloons to see who is going to allow them to take that next step. Who's going to smile at them on the street? Who's going to stop and actually engage in conversation because they're afraid to say, "Hey, I'm on my way. You're kind of bugging me. You're creeping me out here." And as it develops, what we find, or at least what my experience is, and I'm so looking forward, Michael, to your thoughts on this, because what I find, John, is that once they start developing those relationships and we start moving into domestic violence and those relationship problems, is that oftentimes the victim knew long before and during the event that they were dealing with a predatory personality. But there's a part of them that has to either say, I can't fix this and I made a mistake and get out while I can, or they're going to continue to live this kind of fantasy that they have that they can somehow fix this shattered, busted up human being that they're dealing with and somehow change them. But there's a real problem with being able to admit I was wrong in choosing this particular person to start creating a relationship with. And so rather than admit it, they continue in the relationship.
Yeah. Michael, I saw you kind
Can I
of.
jump in here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
they often, like in the case of a female that's being stalked, so often they're told to be nice their whole lives. They don't want to hurt your feelings. And sometimes you have to be a sledgehammer at the breakup to say, this is over, there's no relationship here. And that'll sometimes cause that distance that you're looking for. The other thing, too, is our culture really focuses on pursuit. So you watch every movie, or I would say, like, women will say, "Well, I dated him 8 times, then I kind of gave in, and now we're married." But that's every movie. Like they pursue and they pursue and they pursue, and so the norm seems to be like, just don't give up. It'll work out if you just stay and hang in there and keep pursuing. And so
Mm,
Mike and I are on the same page. But again, they go against their instincts so often. The very beginning, and I always say, like, when you're dating somebody, all the signs are there, or what's going to bug the hell out of you later when you're married. So 20 years from then, you're like, I hated that he watched sports every night, but likely that was there, in the first couple of weeks you were dating. So pay
yeah.
attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there some telltale signs to help identify people that might become problematic, actually turn into stalkers or predators, Michael?
A lot of behavior, back to the behavior. If they're controlling right off the bat, that's usually a bad sign because later they're going to try to keep controlling. And so when you're trying to depart the relationship, if they're not over it, they're going to keep pursuing you and potentially cross that stalking line. But back to the celebrity things, there's two sides. Sometimes they know who the stalker is, and sometimes they have no idea. They're getting a dead bird sent to them once a week or something, and we have to dig in and figure that out.
Wow. Wow. Well, let's go ahead and start with kind of these top 5 lists. I've had each guest prep kind of their top 5 tips for particular aspects of this. We're going to start with Mike King on kind of about what makes a predator. And Mike, please take us through it. What's number 1 on that list?
For me, number one is that predators wear masks and they're really good at what they do, and they get better over time. And so that teenage boy that seems predatory now, if he continues in that same kind of behavioral pattern, is going to be much better. That's why we see serial killers getting better, or serial sexual predators getting better over time because they make mistakes, but because of the fantasy that we've talked about and other things, they fix those and they continue to hone their skills, not only skills of getting contact, but then controlling. So just because somebody looks good, looks normal, sounds normal, doesn't mean they are. And when we hear these stories of people that decide to move in with someone after 2 weeks of dating, and then they all of a sudden wake up one morning saying, how did I get in this position? Well, part of that, how did I get in that position, was that you made a decision and then you cashed all your chips in rather than watching someone over time.
Mhm.
Each of us become friends with our closest friends over time, not over a week. We meet somebody at a conference and we say, I really like that guy. I really like hanging out with that person. I loved listening to the stories that that person told. But then we spend a little more time, or we go fishing with them, or heaven forbid, we go on vacation with somebody, and all of a sudden we start to see their warts and the things that really bother us. And in relationships, I think that's the first thing that we make a mistake on, is we move just too quickly. Predators hide in plain sight.
That's such a good point. I like the phrasing around that, and it's really, I guess, if I would boil it down, it's to raise your awareness to the fact that they're going to be skilled at protecting who they really are, and it's going to take you time to kind of be your own little detective and suss out the reality of who's under that mask. What about behavior? How can that help in terms of seeing behind that mask?
Well, I think along the same line, this idea that as we start to watch people and we start to experience with people, we see in many of these predatory behaviors this idea of controlling, where they might want to separate you, and I'm speaking to the potential victim out there. They may want to separate you from what has traditionally been your safety net, people that you care about that offer good advice, that close friend that used to feel like they could say to you, I don't like that guy, but all of a sudden are feeling less comfortable talking to you about their concerns about someone you're dating or hanging out with. And as they separate us from our safety net, they start to get control. In the cult world, we call it search and separate. Find those people that I can get pulled away from their support system and only relying on me, and then I'm going to have control of them. So if we start talking about behaviors, I think that's probably the biggest, is that person that starts to control their lives and control who they hang out with.
That's, I mean, I wish I could get that information out. There's so many cases that I've looked into where that has been a big component, especially for intimate partner homicide. There's always a mechanism of, oh my God, all of a sudden she couldn't see her friends anymore, or he couldn't see his family anymore. And sometimes it could be really, really quick. There's one case I know in particular where a family member was like, oh yeah, they started dating, and like 4 days later, you're not supposed to see your family anymore. So that's someone that, if they are wearing a mask, they're telling you with their behavior very quickly the truth of what that situation is, or at least the path that it's heading down.
Mike, do you
Um,
feel like that's right in line with the cult stuff that you do as well?
I absolutely do. And I often think this kind of concept that even in personal relationships, it's a one man cult, because a cult leader, it's all about them. It's all about the leader. Mainstream religion, for instance, if we think cults from a religious perspective, mainstream religion is more about transparency and openness, and that we're looking heavenward to whatever God it is that we believe in. But for a cult leader, it's all look at me, all comes to me. I'm the one in control. I'm the power. I'm the deciding vote. And that to me is terrifying in a personal relationship or bigger. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Michael?
I think the same thing. I think we are closer in step than anybody would realize. Like the stalker's the same way. They're the most important person. They're hurting, so they want you to hurt. So there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
yeah, that phrasing really grabbed me. It's like a cult leader of one, a cult of one, essentially. Interesting. All right, how about point three? Tell me about selection.
Well, I don't think that victim selection is random in most cases. And with the case that you started out on today, I mean, one of the things that I learned as I was going through this kind of learning this art and science of profiling or looking at criminal behavior was that in looking at about 1,000 plus criminal cases, John, what we came up with is that if we were to build kind of a continuum for our viewers, and I hope they can visualize this, on one end of the continuum, we put low risk victims, like maybe a child who's living in a close family and goes to primary or an elementary school, comes home every day at 2 o'clock. His mom picks him up at the bus stop. That's a low risk victim. On the other end of the spectrum, we might have someone who is a high risk victim, like somebody involved in the sex trade industry or narcotic dealing or something like that. And so if we just start with that kind of basic starting point, what we've learned over time in looking at thousands of criminal cases is that low risk victims, that stay at home mom or that child, when they are victimized, they're victimized by somebody who's known to them. And they're actually a target of that aggression. So that person has selected them and said, you are it. And when we started off with this story, and you talked about a boyfriend who was focused on a girl, that's a low risk victim that is being targeted. But on the flip side, maybe that drug dealer or that sex trafficker is going to be victimized by somebody who's unknown to them, and they're a victim of opportunity. And I think opportunistic crimes are more rare than targeted kinds of crimes where we know the individual, we select them, and we say, that's going to be my prize to pursue. What we found, that I found is so interesting, is that the only thing that can change that continuum is circumstance, situation, or environment. And the best way I describe that is, let's say tonight, John, my wife's brother calls and says, hey, uh, our other brother has just had a heart attack. He's 300 miles away. He's not going to make it through the night. If you want to see him before he dies, you got to get down here right now. And so she runs out the door and jumps in our beat up old van that we have and says, I got to get 300 miles away. Now, my wife is a low risk person. She goes to church on Sunday. She shops at the same grocery store. She has a small circle of friends. But all of a sudden, based on circumstances and environment and a busted down old van, she is starting to increase her risk of being victimized in an opportunistic way rather than a targeted way. And so as we think about victim selection, we have to think about not who done it, but who's the victim and why did they become a victim? Because these predators are going to test, they're going to watch, they're going to select based on perceived weaknesses, unless, of course, it's the truck driver like a Robert Ben Rhodes who stumbles across somebody broken down on a darkened highway somewhere and says, let me give you a ride to town.
Right.
And so I think it's really important that we kind of look beyond the suspect at first, the whodunit, and think more about who's this victim and why did they become a victim.
Michael, for the cases you work, is that type of selection always very focused, or are there other cases maybe that are non-celebrity cases where the selection's a little more casual, like coworkers, like, Mike King saying that his wife goes to the same supermarket? There could be some guy that figures that out and all of a sudden starts following her pattern. Do you see situations like that?
I see both. I see somebody exactly like what you described. We had one in the movie theater. A girl was walking down the movie theater, and a guy looked at her and decided they needed to be together. But these stalkers and these people that are pursuing, they adapt, and they're very intelligent. Some say below a serial killer, but they'll adapt to whatever, and they'll emulate you to get close. But yeah, we see where they know exactly who they're stalking, and they pick somebody at random because of one guy picked a girl because she had a sweater on that later came out that was similar to something his mother wore. So behavior is a
Wow.
big part of their pursuit.
Wow. Wow. All right, let's get to point number 4 with Mike King. Trauma begets trauma. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and I like to think about this in two buckets, John. One is the victim and one is the predator. And I'll start with the predator because many predators have something in their background that helped them. And it goes to the nature and nurture argument that we always hear, was this person born a killer, or did they just not get warm cookies and milk when they were coming home from school on Thursday nights? And and I don't know, and I've never really cared as an investigator. All I've cared about is the elements of the crime and are they being violated by someone, and it's a mental health provider's problem to sort it out. But many offenders kind of evolve and become more predatory as they learn. And I think that's more the nurture side of things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that they have to stay that way. We see some people who can rise above that and they become legitimate contributing people in society. We see others who do not. But on the victim side, also, there's this thing where I don't know how many times I must have said it as a investigator looking at child sexual abuse. My fear was always, will this child who was victimized become a predator later down the road?
Yeah.
And in some cases that happens, in others it doesn't. Recently you spoke about the book Deceived. We brought together the survivors from the Zion Society cult after 34 years to open a brand new children's advocacy center, a place where children can be forensically and physically examined as part of the criminal process. We had these children speaking at the event and talking about their lives, which have been just incredibly tough roller coasters, but not one of them has become a predator. And
Mhm.
so I've made this mindset over the years that that was always a fear of mine. And some people argue that it's more prominent in one sex versus another sex. But that's, I think, the other thing that I'm trying to bring across in this thing is the fact that just because we were raised in a bad situation and we didn't get that warm chocolate chip cookie on Thursday nights doesn't mean that we have to act out in a negative way. Or just because we were victimized doesn't mean that our story's been written. It's just a piece of the story. And hopefully, if we can get the right kind of support around people as they're going through these things, they can be healthier. In the book Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, I talk about a little girl named Mary Bell from the UK. Mary Bell, at age 10, murdered another child and spent years in an institution that finally was released from that institution. Everyone was convinced that Mary Bell was going to become a predator. I've not found anything that suggests that she would become a predator or that she's become a predator. So I think we have to also keep that Pollyanna thought process that actually something good can happen at the result of really ugly things.
Yeah, absolutely. And a very important thing that I'm sure I'm passionate about as well is this true crime community. How can they be part of this conversation when it comes to these situations with predators?
Yeah, I appreciate that because I think that awareness, not paranoia, is the power. And we used to say in policing all the time on the SWAT team, preparation versus paranoia. Plan, 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 and then you hopefully react correctly. I think the same thing is true for the true crime community. Get as much education as you can that really empowers you and moves you from being kind of this passive viewer to a more informed viewer. Don't just get on a bandwagon and scream that the system is wrong because, for instance, in Idaho right now, with the Brian Koberger conviction that he
Yeah.
just pled guilty to murdering those 4 college students. There's one camp that is angry because there was a plea negotiation. There's another camp that says this was the right thing. Instead of just taking a camp based on emotion, I just hope that we as a true crime community can take positions based on evidence and fact rather than emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a wise man once wrote, "Knowledge is power, and vigilance is not paranoia; it's protection."
I like that.
Yeah. I think it was you that wrote it because it was in the materials you sent me. So uh, let's let's peel back the onion. We've kind of been going through this conversation, starting with the more severe of the cases, and we're kind of peeling the onion back out. Michael Kenney, we want to avoid this situation altogether. How can we avoid becoming a victim in the first place by trying to stop it back when it's simply some level of stalking?
Move to an island and live by yourself. I don't know if you're in, if you're having contact with somebody and you're on dating apps and stuff, you run the risk.
Yeah.
I guess I would rather pick it up, John, if that's okay, at when the stalking begins, because that's probably more helpful.
Yeah.
Um, if that's okay with you. Number one thing I always say is stop all contact. All contact. I'll say it again. Stop all contact. I know it's hard, but if they call you 56 times and you don't answer, and you answer on the 57th, you educated them, and it takes 57 times to get you on the phone, and they'll just escalate their pursuit. I'm actually going to go through my list now. That's in my top five. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll lead you
Absolutely.
through that.
I think
So the other
that's
thing
such
I
a
always
great
say,
start though. That's a great start because
I say it all the time. And I know it's hard when you're getting DM'd on Instagram, and it's hard,
but
but you have to
that
stop all contact.
lesson that you've taught them about the 57. So if it took them a week to make those 57 phone calls, but they got the answer on the 57th, guess what? Next week, they're going to make the same number of calls in 3 days. And the week after that, in 2 days. And in one, it's just going to ramp up essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. And you're causing more harm by answering. So
Yeah.
I know it's hard. And then we educate, especially celebrities. A stalker knows if you have three houses, what the Malibu kitchen looks like. So you can't, and I say this, I'll jump ahead a little bit, but I would say don't post in real time. And we pound this in people's head
Mhm.
because we'll get them beyond the stalker. And sometimes, I hate to say, but it takes getting that stalker's attention to go somewhere else, you know, and to be fixated on something else. And when you've worked so hard to get them over that hill of being stalked, and then they go to the Starbucks, in Nashville by Vanderbilt, and they take a selfie that starts it right back up. Because in the old days, the stalker needed to go and hide in your bushes to get that fix to see you. And now social media has made that really easy to get their
Mm,
fix all the time.
that's a good point.
Wow.
So I always say too, if you think you're being stalked, tell someone, because often you'll go through all this trouble to help it stop, but you didn't tell your coworkers, and this person shows up and says, "Oh, hey, I'm dropping muffins off," and they let them right into your desk. And we've had them where the person isn't there, and they sit down and they email on your behalf to your mom, "I hate you." I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff, because it's back to the isolation that Mike was talking about. I really do love the soul cult leader, because
Yeah.
that's exactly how this plays out. uh, One of the other things, another tip I always say, is know the vehicles in your neighborhood. I'm amazed that I'll go consult and I'll walk out and I'm like, is there any unusual vehicle on your street? And they don't know. And I feel like you should know if that truck's always there or not, because that can prevent a lot. If you walk out and you're like, huh, he's harassing me or she's harassing me, and by the way, it's getting closer and closer to men and women,
Hmm.
but they walk at it and they go, I haven't seen that Honda Civic before. That's unusual. And then I tell them, go over there and get the plate so they know if it shows up again.
Well, and even
Uh,
outside of, I mean, yes, absolutely for stalking, that's a great tip. But you know what? Just in terms of being a good neighbor, that's a good tip as well. Like I keep really good watch on all my local neighbor group here, and I note vehicles. I'm just like that one. Oh, that's that car that's there every Monday.
Unless, of course, we're there to do surveillance on you. We hate when people look at it and they know that truck shouldn't be there.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, if there's a
that's why we
flower
use the
van,
vehicles.
yeah, a flower van
Yeah.
sitting in my front yard, I know it's you, so I'm gonna come out and knock on the
Yeah.
window.
And, we've learned to use more unusual vehicles because they're
Yeah,
looking for SUVs and trucks and vans. So we're a little outside the box. But there's something I say all the time, and I use it to reiterate that the restraining order is not the end game. So I always say the police don't wear bulletproof vests. And the reason I say that is there's plenty of, Mike, I bet you agree, there's plenty of dead people with a restraining order or protection order in their pocket, that is not the end game. And so
yeah,
you have to be vigilant, and you have to mark off every box. And I say to document, 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 because I've had them too where they're like, well, there was another Honda Civic here the other day. I'm not sure if that's the same one. Where if they're being a good steward of documentation, they know that that is the vehicle that was there, and then we can start putting together a case.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, Michael. And the thing that I find so interesting, though, is people are losing trust in the system quite a bit, and so they don't even take the approach of getting that restraining order or a protective order, and that has to happen still. I think psychologically it has to happen for the individual to know I am so serious that I'm going to get this restraining order, and then I'm going to call the police, even if I have to harass the police and say, I've got paper from a signed judge, and this guy's sitting on my front porch. What are you going to do about it? But that's a really tough thing for people to do. But you can't think that it's a one and done, like you're saying. There's so many other things that need to be done.
And I think the police generally in the stalking world do a good job. But I think very often if you get into an area that hasn't dealt with it, they really struggle. And so I agree. I think the restraining order in a big way is against the person stalking. If they show up and get served, if they're, like you said earlier, if they're of normal mindset, that might help get them away, but it also may ignite them into the next level of, I've got to win you over so you'll drop these charges.
And
Yeah.
let me ask you this: using that story that John started off with, someone who is probably a professional, but then is hiring private investigators and others. If that protective order had been on the books and in place, would that have stopped most legitimate private investigators from saying, wait a minute, there's something serious going on here? And maybe even that individual who has something to learn, has a reputation or other things to back off. Because I think too often people are thinking, oh, well, that's kind of an important person, or he says he knows the police chief personally or something else. It's not going to be worth it for me to do it. And I just think that's baloney. Go for the protective order and get the paper at least.
Those private investigators should have made an effort to look if there was anything outstanding. And honestly, in my world, that's one of our biggest fears is, can you find my long lost cousin? And they're actually a stalker trying to, the person moved 3 states away. We helped them disappear. They've changed their number, their address, everything. And but very often, I want to throw this in too, John. Our phone numbers are quickly becoming our social security numbers. So
Mhm.
if they have your phone number, they can go to Kroger and walk up and say, my wife was here. I want to make sure, I want to look back and make sure she got lactose intolerant beer. I'm kidding, of course. But then you can track their schedules and know where they shopped. So the phone numbers are becoming a bigger problem on, like your social security number, to be able to track you.
Yeah.
And I always say too, and I want to jump back. Those PI should have, in their due diligence, gone through and said, is there an element of problem here? Is there restraining orders or anything that would stop me? Now, I won't get into any other cults, but some of them that hired private investigators will just throw a ton of money at them, and
Yeah.
these gentlemen or women will overlook any kind of the
Yeah.
legal side of it, which is sad to me. So they should have known, they should have seen that there was an issue, and they should have declined the cases. And then, of course, the request. Come on, that's odd. Trackers in most states are illegal, so to be told, "Hey, go put 3 on the car in case they find 2," is just absurd to me.
Yeah.
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 So hopefully they're being pursued as well. And I mean, a PI. One of the things, like, this is my book, and it purposely has a scary looking front. But one of the things we did is on the bind, it doesn't say anything. So a stalking victim can throw it in their purse and not become a victim to domestic violence because they saw that they're looking at stalking. So
Yeah.
it's all, looking at the behavior, and the PI side, they should have looked and said there's an issue here and not helped them. And hopefully they'll be pursued as well because this person has not been found yet.
Yeah, Michael, is it a real thing to think that there would be PIs just working in a gray area, or like unethical private investigators, or is it literally just a matter of money? Like, okay, well, this is going to get my rent paid for the month.
I mean, in any industry, there's people that are in the gray that I would not do business with, but we also get bizarre requests every week. I mean, I get asked to do things like, can you put a tracker? Can you bust this person's phone? We want to, find out everything on it. And then, if you're not doing it legally, it's not admissible, but you have to have a brain to know when something's illegal that you're being requested.
Yeah.
And even just pursuing somebody that there's an issue. You've looked it up and they're like, oh wow, there's a restraining order or something else, and you're still willing to do it. But yeah, there are people in every industry that the money speaks louder than their brain, and they pursue it.
Wow. All right. Well, I know you've got one more big point. I think it's actually the title of your book. Tell us about thinking like a stalker.
Yeah, that's kind of where it started for me because we would go and I often say, and I say it in the kindest way, I hope, that common sense goes so far. So if you keep seeing the person show up everywhere you are, you can go on your phone and do star pound 21 pound and see if your phone's being tracked and hacked. And I'll slow that down, star pound 21 pound, and everything should say disabled. And John, you and I have a mutual friend that's a reporter that we had dinner with one night,
Yeah.
and him and I were riding along, and I had him do it, and everything came up enabled. He was in a panic, and I said, "Well, do you pay for your phone?" Yeah, you better look, Mike.
Yeah, I'm doing it
But
right
it
now. Hold on. Star
yeah,
pound 21 pound.
21 pound, and then hit call like you're making a phone call,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's primarily for iPhone. That the other phones, the Googles and the whatever, are a little different, but
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, it actually brings up a screen
most
and
entertainment people are carrying an iPhone.
yeah,
Well,
it's
so
telling
this
me
particular person,
I'm on a Google phone, and it's basically spitting out a report telling me the call forwarding is unconditionally. I don't know what that means, but voice not forwarded, data not forwarded, fax not forwarded,
right?
SMS not forwarded. Yeah, everything is not forwarded here, and it breaks it out literally step by step. So I guess if my spouse was like trying to track me or something, they could install an app on my phone that would, like my call log might be forwarded, or the websites I'm visiting and stuff like that might be forwarded off so they could review it.
Or with
Interesting.
keyloggers, that's a big one. You're going through divorce and you have a keylogger on their phone. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know they had a credit union account, for instance, and login. But it's a big problem. There's a whole lot of
Wow.
apps, and they're really well hidden on the phones. They're very difficult to find sometimes, and it's
Yeah.
becoming a bigger and bigger problem.
Mm.
But
Mm.
Should
back to
someone in that
yeah,
position get a new phone and start
well,
fresh?
that's a fantastic question because they'll have the phone, they'll clean it, but then they backed it up on the cloud or on their laptop,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
it, it shows up. And it's worse then because in the old days of the mafia and organized crime, if you could get somebody to go in and do their bug sweep that was on the good team, if you will, they convinced them that everything was good, and then they'd speak freely again. So it's the same thing. If you think your phone is clear, you're going to talk and do things, like you would never say in front of them, or if you didn't want them to know,
Yeah.
that you're moving with the kids
That's
out
what
of
led to
state.
El Chapo getting arrested,
That's
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. But it is a problem, and the apps, like I said, they're very hidden. It could be as simple as the one we just did. It was a text with the soccer schedule or one of the ball schedules, and when they clicked it, they put it in between. So there's the link, there's the tracking, and then there's the document. And
Oh,
so
Wow.
wow.
it's very clever. But we do a lot of things when we sit down and do consultations on stalking. We look at their phones, their computers. We have a lot of those hacks, like the star pound 21, to just see what we're dealing with. But and again, that's where it comes back to think like a stalker and stop them. If you go out in your backyard and you look around, you go, where would I hide a camera? Where would I hide? Where would I park my car if I saw them up on this back road? And then we'll go install a camera up on that little country road to see who's up there, and
Awesome.
then document
Interesting.
our case.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other aspects, like, for the Starbucks barista, in terms of thinking like a stalker, or is there, should she be varying her drive home? Should she be, practicing some type of situational awareness, something along those lines?
Yeah, you definitely want to vary your routes and your times. When we hope I'm not revealing anything, fellow PIs, when we follow you as a private investigator and you're a creature of habit, like 90% of us are, and I lose you at the light at the McDonald's and Speedway, for instance, then I know the next day to just come back and sit there and pick you up from the McDonald's and the Speedway to the next segment. So since I don't have a five-car outfit like the FBI or the SWAT team, where they run multiple vehicles, we'll just pick you up along the way and on each section of your route, and then figure out where you're working or what you're doing.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
Gotcha.
varying everything, and I mean little things like so many people, they go to the same Starbucks at the same time every day, and they don't know they're being followed for what I just described. Like they follow you for the section, but I always say like if you think you're being followed, pull into a parking lot and drive in a circle a bunch of times, and you'll easily fish out who's following you. If you're on the interstate and they're following you, slow down below the speed limit. And if they're following you, they're likely going to have to slow down as well, which, by the way, we hate as private investigators. But I'll pass you away to the next exit, just so you know. But those are the little things, that just be aware of everything around you, and then talk to your neighbors. You think there's a problem? And did you notice that van coming through here again? And let them help you back to the documentation. But also, I use an acronym a lot called DEATH, and document every attempt to harass is what I
Mm,
always say. And I pound that in their heads, because you really need to keep documenting, because if you're asked, in the pursuit of a criminal case, well, how many times they do it? Well, they've done it a bunch of times. I know I went to church that morning, and so it's good to hand them a full case file.
yeah.
You got to do.
Great
And
advice.
Mike, I mean, no offense, but we're used to doing the police job for them, and a lot of times, a lot of cases where we come and we lay it all out and make it very easy for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. Wow.
Mike, I know you have some information. Can you share an example about situational awareness and how it made the difference between safety and victimization?
Um, well, one of the things I always think about, John, and this may not be what you were hoping for, but I remember one night walking out of the mall late at night with my wife,
Yeah.
and we're walking out together, and I'm kind of thinking, I wonder if we ought to stop and get a burger or something, And I said, "What are you thinking about?" And she's like, I'm looking across the parking lot to see if our vehicle's under a light or if it's in a dark area, if there are people out there around that vehicle." And I thought, there's when we talk about situational awareness, there's a certain level of confidence that we all get, and then there's a certain level of complete arrogance that we all get. Every morning I jump on my bike and I go along I take a little pathway. It's about 5 miles long down the river. And the first 2 miles are on real narrow gravel roads. And then the second 3 miles are on a paved section.
Hmm.
I am just blown away every single morning at the number of beautiful young women that are walking alone with headsets on and
Mm,
staring at their device. And I think to myself, when we're talking situational awareness, we have to be aware. And I don't know, I'd love your comments on that, because I think we, again, when I go back to what level of risk are you willing to accept in your life? Because while you're not responsible for being victimized, you are certainly responsible for the environment you allow yourself into that might set that up.
yeah, but I think that quote that you gave earlier makes an important distinction, because we want to be vigilant, but we don't want it to get to the point of paranoia, right? Like
Yes,
you want to be
agreed.
able to enjoy your life and going out for your bike ride every morning. And vigilance might be being aware of your situation, maybe not running with or riding with headphones on, or maybe you have one ear in and the other ear out so you
Mhm.
can still hear. Like there's decisions and thoughts that you can make around being vigilant that aren't necessarily like, oh, someone's coming after you, Mike King, and they're going to get you while you're on your bike ride.
Correct. And that you're making decisions. Is jogging alone versus finding a friend to jog with
Yeah.
wiser? When I'm going through West Ogden on the bike trails, there's a part that goes through a transient camp. I don't go through that part. I personally don't care, and especially at this age, don't have the gumption to fight my way out of something. So I just think, I'll find a better trail to take, or I'll go around the transient camps on the road and risk traffic over risking being on the camp line alone.
Yeah. Well, that just sounds like good decision making, but also a bit like trusting your gut. Michael Kenney, how important is trusting your gut in these situations?
Oh, I say it all the time. I mean, I watch people go against their instincts, and kind of what Mike said. You're walking out to your car, and it's under a light, but there's four, interesting people standing by it. You might want to give it a little time to clear out and not go over and say, "Excuse me," while I get in your car. So, yeah, but
Yeah.
I say it to ladies a lot. If you're jogging by yourself or whatever, and you pass somebody, and your intuition just screams something's off, and they ask you for help, don't stop. Who cares if you're rude? You
Yeah.
know, as you know, I jokingly say, "See you on Dateline," as I was saying earlier. Uh, but I say it to stick because I want it to impact you, and I use humor a lot, just to to say something to somebody so they recall it. But like, you really need to be focused on your surroundings. And we're amazed too. Sometimes we'll have a stalker case where we're like, are we doing everything to look behind you? Your situational aware, I can't say it. Your situational awareness
Yeah.
became a tongue twister. And then we'll follow them just for fun. I'm like, oh, I'm in the area, and I'll go, oh, they're out, and I'll follow them. And they are clueless. Now, this is what I do. Don't get me wrong, but and I even sometimes I'll sat behind one at a restaurant recently, and the whole meal. And finally, I leaned over and tapped and handed him my bill, by the way. And I said, "You should pay this because I've sat here behind you for an hour." And I made it to be funny, but they didn't notice me following for blocks, and that's
Mm.
not okay if you're really worried about somebody showing up. Now, I look like an accountant, we always say, so I don't look threatening. And Mike, if you're going through that camp on your bike next time, there's an old joke: just take off your pants because nobody wants to fight a guy with no pants. So.
Well, there's a good tip
That,
straight from Michael
that would
Kenney.
be, I think that would be a felony if I took off my pants.
Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate you both joining in on this conversation. This is one of those conversations I'm really proud to help facilitate, because I do know there's great information in here that could be very helpful to someone out there that needs it. But also, I wanted to share the information about where people can find you, find the books. Let's start with Mike King. How can people get in touch with you and buy your book?
Thanks, John, and Michael. Thank you so much for letting me join with you. We've got to do this more often, John. Maybe on other cases, just chat for a moment about some of the risk reduction
I
opportunities.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can find me, my newest book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. It's available through profilingevil.com, and there are 3 options to buy it there, because I'm offering kind of like a couple of options. But you can also get it at amazon.com worldwide in audio. And John, I'm shooting that as a missile across your bow. So audio and ebook and hardbound and paperback, and then just at Profiling Evil is the easiest way to find me. So thank you so much again. And I have to say, whether this is cut out or not, Michael, when I first decided to try this world of YouTubing, my first call was to John Lorden, and he was kind enough to talk to me and kind of give me a lot of advice. And over the years has continued to give me advice. So I really look to you for your insights, John. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you. I really do. And especially in a time where I feel like people aren't so helpful for each other, especially in this space. That means a lot to me.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Michael Kenney, where can they find your book?
My book's just on Amazon. To make it simple, you're probably on there buying socks later anyway, so go ahead and throw this book in. It may help somebody.
There we
I
go.
really wrote it in a way that I just wanted it to be conversational. So it's an easy read with a lot of information, and just, and again, Mike, I'd love to do something else with you and John going forward. I really, your expertise is just, it's intriguing to me because you're hitting on a different cylinder, and I'm sure together we could do some great help out there. As far as contacting me, I'm primarily referral only, but
Yep.
the book, I, I was going to kid say the book has my phone number in the back. It does not, by the way. But you can. I'm on X and some other places. Or contact John Lorden. He knows how to get in touch with me.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Thank you both very much. Really appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always
Yeah,
good to
and
see you.
I wish we could just have a beer, sit down and chat for another hour here. And remember, Michael Kenney is also appearing in the HBO Yogurt Shop docu-series being released in August. A big thank you to both Mike King and Michael Kenney for joining us here today. Just to recap the information that Mike King gave us, remember, predators wear masks. Behavior tells the truth. Selection, it's rarely random. And trauma might beget trauma. It might start a chain, but it's not the person's destiny. People can overcome that. And of course, the true crime community, can be protectors. We can be protectors for each other. We can be protectors for our family, friends, our neighbors. Of course, the information that Michael Kenney shared with us on how to try to stop if you are being stalked or harassed, stop all contact immediately, period. No exceptions. Don't post in real time. Tell someone what's going on. Tell your family, tell your friends. Make sure that you're leaving a trail and sharing that information that helps protect you. No vehicles. Keep an eye out on your street. Notice any strange vehicles that are coming around. Just take a little mental note of that. Or better yet, a written note. And of course, remember, if you're worried that you might be being stalked, think like a stalker. What positions would they be taking? What types of things could they be trying to do? If you enjoy this content, please visit lordandarts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee. We really appreciate it. You might have noticed we don't have several commercials running through these presentations. We do that so you can stay focused on the content. We hope that you appreciate that. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend, and please join us again next week for a new episode of Searchlight right here on the Lord and Arts channel.